Hello, and welcome to Mr. D Says, Episode 2, Story Problems and Solutions. In the last episode, I talked to you about how stories pose a problem, and that the job of the story is basically to bring us from that problem to its resolution. So we need to find a solution to the problem. Generally, when we're reading stories, we don't go straight from one to the other. Although we do hope for that in real life, a story like this isn't very interesting because it simply takes us through the problem to the solution, and it's easy. So, say for instance, the three little pigs who are approached by a big bad wolf simply put up a barbed wire fence around their house and a watchdog. The wolf knocks at the door, they set the watchdog loose, and it's all over. Not a very interesting story, though it might be kind of funny from a pig's point of view. Ultimately, though, what we prefer in our stories are complications. They're things that stop the clear and smooth path from problem to solution and make the story interesting. These are probably what would occupy, if I had my roller coaster here, they would be part of the rising action. So they build the tension in the story. And basically what they do is they present possible solutions or possible paths that the hero or the heroine of the story might take. But ultimately, those possible solutions can't all work out. Certainly not the easy ones anyway. So let's just say, for instance, we start off with the problem, and the problem is that we need to find some way to escape the big bad wolf. Well, our first complication is that the first pig doesn't have very much imagination. He finds straw, he builds himself a house of straw, which doesn't last very long, and ultimately comes to pieces. Well, the second little pig, trying to learn from the first pig's example, builds his house out of sticks, hoping that it will hold up a little bit longer. It's a better idea, but ultimately it doesn't work out for him either. And that leaves it up to the third pig, who's a little more innovative, and he says, bricks and mortar, I think it might work. And of course it does, and ultimately that brings us to the solution of our story. Now, each of these complications along the way, you can think of them as being kind of that they're little trials or obstacles for our main character. So the character sets off and encounters a number of trials. So if we were thinking of the three little pigs, well, unfortunately, there are casualties here. That the first little pig meets with his trial and fails. The second little pig meets with his trial and fails. The third little pig meets with his trial and ultimately succeeds to come to the solution. And that's really how stories progress. This is how tension is built in your story. So if you are planning out a short story, say a picture book like we are in class right now, then what you want to do is you want to think about what different kinds of obstacles or complications might happen along the way to bring us ultimately to your solution. Now, I've put 3 here, but you could have 2 or 4 or 5. Obviously, it depends on the length of your story, but what you want is you want your story to be interesting, and so you want just enough complication to sort of give it a little bit of spice without overcomplicating the story as well. Now, one of the things to also consider is that sometimes you have more than one problem, and I'm just going to add this over here. Let's say that this is another problem that's going to require another set of obstacles and trials and another set of possible solutions. Sometimes this happens in more complicated stories. Now, the first time around, I talked to you about The Lord of the Rings. Well, in The Lord of the Rings, we have the main story, which is going on, which would be the story of, say, Frodo. But then Frodo's best buddy, Sam, is also experiencing trials and obstacles as he goes through the story. This is the difference, really, between what would be considered a story arc. Let's see if we can get an arc here. A story arc, which is the whole story, and a character arc, which is one character's progress through a story, which is going to be the subject of yet another talk.